Hello, everybody, and welcome to our New Masters 2024 webinar. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. We've got a lot to share with you over the next 60 minutes, so I will crack right on. As we go through today, we do have a Q&A box. If you want to drop your questions into that, then we will endeavour to get to those at the end of the session after our discussion with our panellists. So just to give you a brief overview and introduction, when I was thinking about how to, and I've just gone back from holiday, so this was sort of ruminating around my brain over the past week or so. When I was thinking about how to introduce the session today, I thought, just because we're talking about digital, for the lols, I would ask AI what we should expect from 2024, and this is what I got. 2024 is marked by substantial societal and cultural transformations, primarily driven by technological advancements, evolving global political scenarios, and a growing consciousness about environmental issues. These shifts are profoundly reshaping social norms, work culture, and international cultural dynamics. Well, yes, or as we sometimes say, no shit, Sherlock. But the question that kind of begged for me was how are all these things, and in particular, how is technology reshaping what customers think, feel and do? And in a nutshell, that's what we're here to look at today. The evolving landscape of digital engagement in the UK and what that means for brands. On a broader front, of course, the UK is currently seeing some green shoots in both consumer and market confidence, fresh off the back of a change in government, better than expected growth in GDP, and also a drop in inflation. But it feels like it's a very fragile optimism. With the elections looming in the US, one wonders how long it will actually last. But at the end of the day, as we like to say at Quadrangle, customers are the only constant in this ever-changing world, and that's why this research matters. It shows how we're changing as a nation in terms of our attitudes towards technology and digital in particular, and the role that digital plays in our lives. And as you'll see very shortly, it sends out a very clear message that a one-size-fits-all solution or approach to your customer strategy is probably very short-sighted. We're privileged today to have two people who with us who know more than a thing or two about customer strategy. Simon Brady from Gatwick and Lindsay Forster from Shepper, ex of Lloyd's banking group in Aviva, and there'll be more from them a bit later. But first, I'd like to introduce you to Ben Skelton, my fellow partner and chief exec of Quadrangle, who's going to share with you some of the highlights from this year's findings. Ben is a power master. Whereas I, despite the fact that I actually hate talking to people on the phone, am a mobile master. And what precisely that means and how it makes us different from each other is imminently to be revealed. So over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Ali. So I'm going to try and whittle through this. It's quite a lot to share. But first of all, I just wanted to take us a little bit on a journey of digital, and we'll keep using the word digital. I know AI is all the buzz at the moment, but as we'll see through this presentation, customers are actually finding it quite difficult to get their heads around exactly what AI is, exactly how it's going to impact their lives. So, this is exactly the situation that we were facing when we first started doing this research back in 2016, but I'll come back to that in a second. Just in terms of where we are, and I think this is a Taylor Swift reference, which the panel will pick up on later, no doubt. But we're what we call the third wave of digital. And so if the first two waves were really about the sort of overall hardware and software build and then getting into more advanced functionality, really where we've been since 2016 is in the sort of era of internet ubiquity. And people are starting to get much more familiar with what the internet, what digital, what all the different tools available to them can provide them. Or are they? That's something we'll come back to just to show where the nation is currently. But back in 2016, we were faced with some really interesting research challenges, lots of clients coming to us with lots of sort of digital first strategies and trying to come up with digital first propositions using communications that had obviously changed in the way that they were trying to reach customers. And a lot of people we spoke to in the research we were doing were sort of quite confused by what they were being asked to do or what they were being asked to think or how they were being asked to behave by brands. And it occurred to us in the research that we came across some people who felt incredibly empowered by digital, who felt that, you know, the mobile phone that they now had in their hand in particular had really changed the way that they were doing things, and wanted to see certain brands and new brands that were coming along really play into that. But obviously at the other end of the spectrum, we also saw lots of customers who felt that they were, you know, perfectly capable of doing things, but couldn't quite understand why they were being asked to do so much more, and what the new options were that were available to them, and why in particular they were being asked to stop doing some of the things that they knew very well and loved. So we felt that at what it was in 2016, about 75%, so 3/4, smartphone penetration, that it was time to actually understand what this looked like from a customer perspective, not necessarily from a societal perspective. There's loads of research that does that, and it has been around for a long time, but really thinking about that relationship between customer and brand, and how brands needed to think about the customers that they had and where they were at in terms of their kind of digital capability, and how they felt as a customer being asked to use digital more and more. And so what we saw were there were a range of different customers who either felt that they were very much empowered by the digital world or not, that there were these different types of digital customer out there. And it felt important to understand that and to be able to report that back to our clients in our recommendations and our thoughts on their strategy. And also how those customers felt that digital was really equipping them in the relationship that they have with brands, the interactions that they had with them, and also how they might transact with them as well. So that just gives you a little bit of a potted history as to why we got to looking at New Masters, and 2016 was the first time that we did that. What we found through that first piece of research, and it was a mix of qualitative and quantitative research, but once we got our analyst team involved, was that looking across all the data, there were 4 areas that really influenced what those different digital engagement preferences were. The first was very much around how dependent they felt on their mobile and how much they used mobile in their daily lives, not necessarily to make calls and texts. Back in the day in 2016, you might remember that those were still some of the predominant things that people use mobile phones for. They barely use them for those functionality these days. But, you know, how the phone fitted into their lives. And also their attitude to technology. So were they an early adopter? Were they people that followed technology? How quickly were they keen as individuals to adopt to, I guess, the different ways in which they could do things? A really interesting one around data sharing, because obviously that was something that people were being asked to do more and more, and are still being asked to do. And there's been lots of controversy around when data goes wrong. But this sort of sense of a willingness to share data with brands to either get something in return for that, or to get greater relevance, or whatever else it might be. There was a greater understanding that if they did that amongst certain people, that might lead to certain benefits. And of course, there are people at the other end of the spectrum who felt, actually, I'm really concerned about sharing data, and I didn't realize I was sharing quite as much data as I thought I was when it came to using some of these new tools. And then something that's, I guess, always been around, but this sense of where do I feel in terms of my relationship with brands? Do I feel I've got some sort of sense of power? And of course, with digital, which drove, you know, a lot more competition, a lot more options available to people, and different ways of either complaining or, you know, dealing with brands, whether they felt that they were growing in terms of their sense of and their perceived power that they might have over brands. And I think, Ali, you were in the shower one morning and it came to you that actually what might be really interesting is if we created an MBTI, a Myers-Briggs classification for digital engagement. And anyone that knows Myers-Briggs knows that there are 16 cells in Myers-Briggs based on kind of 4 dynamics that really help to just decipher, I guess, what kind of personality type you have and how you might choose to communicate and engage with people and engage with subject matter, etc. So it was a really interesting parallel. And what we were looking for is to really understand those nuances as deeply as we could. So in the same way as MBTI works, you know, we were looking at the extremes across those 4 dimensions. So whether you are higher, for example, on mobile dependency, or lower, your attitude to technology, etc. So you can see on the right-hand side the little 16 cells that we created, where individuals might be higher or lower on those different 4 discrete influences there, all the way down to the bottom left, where people are low on all 4, all the way to the top right, where people are high on all 4. But of course, 16 cells, there's quite a lot to deal with. And even MBTI has progressed into things like 16P, which have got a much better sense as to maybe how some of the commonalities across those different cells show themselves. And, you know, you can start to cluster people into different cohorts. So that's a job that we did to sort of try and wrestle this down a little bit and create 4 overarching, what we're calling post-digital customer cohorts that kind of give a better line of sight, if you like, to the macro trends that we might see. Very helpful for brands to understand their customer base, their prospects, the audiences they're going after at the individual sale level, because that gives a much greater clue as to how their propositions will be received, how their communications will be taken, and what they ask customers to do, what the call to action might be. But when trying to understand the macro trends, much easier for us to look at 4 overall cohorts. And this is what we're looking to do here today. We've been tracking the direction of travel since 2016. We took a break in the pandemic period. So from 2020 to 2023, we didn't run the research, but we've run it again this year. And actually what's really interesting is we can look at not just where have we moved from 2016, but what have those shifts pre and post pandemic been between 2019 and today? And there are some really fascinating shifts. I think a few things to say before I show you some data. We're definitely a nation still in transition, as you will probably all know, and this notion of digital exclusion is still very much a hot topic. And you know, there's a view that around sort of 20% or so have a level of digital exclusion to them that means that they're not able to take advantage of many of the other ways in which people who are more digitally, you know, engaged and capable are able to take advantage of. But it's important to remember this is an online study, so the people we're talking to have already got some level of digital capability. So as I said, this is not a societal project. We're not trying to understand necessarily the digitally excluded as a group. This is more about when customers are dealing with their brands and thinking that they can run their digital strategy across everybody, that actually there are groups of people that are going to respond to that in a very different way. So we're still moving into that stronger digital engagement and capability kind of level of progress, if you like. We can still see, though, that even though there is a big group now who are very digitally capable, there's still a real clear tension between analog, as we're calling them, and digital preferences. And you know, the difference between those who like to do things exclusively online and those who still very much either want a physical presence or want to deal with people as human beings rather than just chatbots and things like that. And the other thing that's really important is whilst there's a group, and Ali described herself as a mobile master, one of the fastest growing groups we've seen are the mobile masters. They are not necessarily a soft target just because they've got their mobile in their hand, perhaps too much for their own health. But you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that they want to engage with a brand either through their mobile or digitally. And in fact, there are some areas where they are, you know, they want to run a mile from the way that some brands are wanting to deal with customers today. So as I mentioned, sort of in real life, still very much valued. So apps are not necessarily the most preferred way of dealing with brands. We can see that because of this range of requirements that people have, you know, we've been talking about omni-channel, you know, strategies with brands for a long time, but excellence in omni-channel is now really becoming a basic expectation, apart from, if you like, some of those brands that are digital only and may have found a way of finding a particular group of customers that want to, I guess, respond to their beat. And we can also see that a lot of what's going on, not just with digital, but obviously with AI as well, and the way that tech is moving, there can be concerns over the impact on mental health and well-being and sort of, you know, broader society in general. And I think just as we go through all this data, there's one thing to bear in mind, and we hear this through a lot of the qualitative work we do as well. There's so much uncertainty in the world that Ali was just talking about. You know, we're in macro flux, we really are. But there is something about brand relationships and the way that brands interact with customers that can actually really provide a kind of antidote to that uncertainty, and the sort of trust that people have in the brands that they love can sometimes be far, far stronger than, as we've seen with politicians and politics in general and the way that society is moving, a real reduction in trust across those parts of society, if you like. So it's something to really bear in mind if we want to hold on to that brand trust. How should we be coming across with our customers, and how can we make sure that we are including them and not just talking to a particular group of people who have got a particular set of skills? So I didn't really touch on the classification in that much detail. So the 4 cohorts we've got are digital masters. So they are typically high on mobile, obviously, but also some of the other parts of the classification as well. You've got the mobile masters who have always got mobile as one of their high dynamics, but very often don't have the other ones necessarily in play, all the way down to where they are very strong on their mobile, but don't have that sense of power, that following of technology, or that belief or view that you know, if you share your data, it's a good thing to do. But what was interesting back in 2016, if we just take the bottom group for a moment, digital doubters back then, it was only 9, whatever that is, sort of eight to 9 years ago, they were the largest group. And this is why doing this research back then was so important to us, because we were getting all these briefs from what we call client land and Soho, very much awash with digital masters largely, when the public was not there. And that's why I was sort of talking earlier on about a lot of these sort of propositions and communications approaches just really falling flat because the consumer was largely unready. So that might sort of surprise people that the digital doubters were the largest group back in 2016. But if we remember back then, really the iPhone had only been around for 9 years or so, and this whole sort of shift of adoption was still happening. Where we are today is that there has been this fundamental shift. So, since 2016, we've seen that digital masters are now the largest group. They're the biggest cohort. The digital doubters have shrunk a lot. I don't think any of this will necessarily be big surprises to people, but the largest, so I guess the group that's seen the biggest increase are the mobile masters, who have increased by 12% since 2016. And the power masters have remained, almost static. There was a little bit of an increase as we went towards 2019, but that's fallen back again. I think what's happened is a lot of some of the ways in which they were starting to adopt their behaviors, they then saw that with a real growth in the way that brands were using digital and creating, if you like, a bit of a disconnect to their customers, that didn't sit well with the way in which they like to interact with brands. They'd be much more kind of face-to-face, and some of the sort of older ways perhaps of gaining influence and thinking about how they might gain advantage from the brands that they're customers of. But if you think about just in the sort of short space of time in 8 years, and how very often society can change quite slowly and over quite an elongated period of time, this is a fundamental shift that people have been taken through. And I guess what's also really interesting to think about, okay, so what's happened in the last 5 years since just before the pandemic? Because we were all told that we all had to start using, our mobile phones and online to buy things because it was much more difficult to go to the stores and with social distancing and all that kind of thing. But actually the shifts since 2019 haven't been as dramatic as we may have thought at this level. So for example, the digital masters had only grown by 5% since before the pandemic, whereas the mobile masters had increased by 10%. So you can see that the mobile masters were a little bit more in the increase over that period of time. Just to give you a little bit of a snapshot, so I'll put all of this up just from the interest of time. The digital masters, so at 43% of the nation, they're the youngest cohort, as you'd probably imagine. And they're a fairly even mix between males and females. If we go to the mobile masters, they're the fastest growing cohort, as I've just been saying. They're 27% now, but they're also the most female cohort at 61%. The power masters over there on the right-hand side in blue, they're 13% now. They're the oldest cohort, again, as you might imagine, and they're also the most male cohort at 64%. And then the digital doubters, they're at 17%. They've got the lowest omni-channel expectations. In fact, when we look across the piece, they've got some of the lowest expectations from brands per se, but they're also more male in terms of their makeup. So that just gives you a quick kind of, if you like, demographic snapshot of what those groups are about. Obviously, we always talk about generations these days. This just gives you a sense for each of the generations what their profile looks like. So don't read across the chart. Look very much at Gen Z, millennials in isolation, for example. So 55% of Gen Z are digital masters in the orange, 59% of millennials are digital masters. As you can see, as we get towards boomers, there's a much more evenly distributed across the cohorts. I think what's interesting though is, there's still 1 in 8 of the Gen Z, so 12% there in the purple color, who are digital doubters. And we hear this again quite a lot in our research. We've done some research recently among students to sort of understand the role of cash in society and things like that. And you can really see that there is a desire not to get too caught up in everything kind of, virtual, digital, AI, etc., and to hold on to and try and, I guess, almost train themselves into having some traits about them that are very much still in the kind of physical world and the analog world, as we call it. So I think it's very, quick and easy to think, well, all Gen Z would be digital masters, wouldn't they? And all millennials would be because they're younger and that's what young folk do. But actually, there's a good proportion still who do not fall into those categories. So again, as a brand, when thinking about who are the customers we want to attract, who do we want to appeal to, the different segments we might have out there, I think it's also really important to overlay on any segmentation where might they be from a digital engagement perspective. So I'm going to go into a section now just looking at mobile and technology, and I'm going to speed up a little bit. Just looking at some of the mobile habits that people have. I mean, we are a nation of mobile addicts, we know that. And I think, if we look across the piece, we can see that those, some of those habits and behaviors have changed. So the data you've got in the round circles at the bottom there is the difference between 2019 and today. So yeah, the first place I look for any kind of sort of information is my mobile phone. That's increased the most. But also I rarely go more than an hour without checking my phone has increased, a lot as well. So 11% there. And, you've got different types of habit there, I guess, in terms of things that might be a little bit more positive for you, for example, in terms of if you're looking to try and find cheaper prices, whereas, the first thing you do when you wake up and check your phone, maybe not quite the best health habit that one could have. And if you just look across the different cohorts there, you've got the digital masters and mobile masters, as you might imagine, because they're more mobile tethered, if you like, who are showing more of these kind of traits versus the power masters and digital doubters. And of course, to some degree, that's the way that the classification is built. But it also gives you a sense that on some metrics, and we'll see this change quite dramatically soon, the mobile masters look very much like digital masters just because of some of the ways in which they're behaving with the device, in particular, the mobile device that they have. One of the other areas, of course, that's been growing is mobile and digital payment. Quite a lot of data on this chart, but you can see that across the groups, the top data there is just telling you whether they use any kind of digital or mobile payment. This includes PayPal as well, so you can imagine that bumps the figures up quite a bit. If you then look in the pie chart, you can see whether they're using more than one, at least one, or they're not using it at all. And again, nothing here that would necessarily surprise anybody. And then at the bottom there, just whether they're using Apple, GPay or PayPal. So yeah, to some degree, the world as we might expect it, how we might look at it, looks, as we might expect. So, digital masters and mobile masters, largely being more ahead than the other two cohorts. And we thought it was just worth taking a little bit of a sense check with customers as to whether they feel that technology has improved the interactions and the relationships that they have with brands. And you can see that, things like speed of service, they feel that it has increased and improved that. These are on it's a 10-point scale. So we've looked at the top 3 boxes here. We're not trying to push the data too hard. So some of the numbers obviously would be higher if we went to top 4 boxes, but we're really trying to tease out differences here. And you can see across the piece there have been some improvements that people feel that they've gained over the last 5 years. I won't spend too much time on that chart. I think just looking ahead, some of the technology that's either already in existence or is coming down the pipe is going to be more sort of prevalent for people. You can see that, full fiber broadband, people feel that that's going to bring some improvements to their lives. It's going to have a positive impact. Genetic and genome testing as well, and biometrics and things like that. But you can see that people are, much more in divided camps when it comes to things like AI, the use of bots, augmented reality, and something that's always confused people, open finance, even when we give people an explanation as to what that is. A lot of people still feeling that this is just not something that they're particularly interested in or want, or indeed definitely don't want. And obviously we're on the topic of AI. We couldn't have done the study without looking at it, just throwing some words out there to try and get a sense as to how people are feeling about it. 52% have got some sense of a sort of positive sentiment towards it. You could argue whether intrigued is positive or, a little bit somewhere in the middle, but 52% either feel intrigued, fascinated, or excited. You've got those in the middle, 38%, a bit indifferent, a bit confused about it, feel personally ignorant about it. And then 47% who feel at least one of those negative sentiments there, scared, threatened. These are quite strong words, but also resigned, and some feeling angry about it. I think interesting to look at that from the different cohorts. You can see that the digital masters and power masters are feeling something more positive in terms of the overall shape of their profile. But mobile masters and digital doubters are actually looking very similar to each other in terms of actually is tipping more into the negative than necessarily feeling positive. Why does this matter? I think it's just important for brands to think about where AI fits into their solutions, what it's doing, and how their customers may well feel about it, and what suspicions they might have about what it's there to do, what it's trying to do, how it's trying to maybe interfere with the ways in which they're used to doing things and want to do things. And again, just staying with the AI theme for a second, I'm not going to cover all of these, but interesting to see that you've got a fifth who feel that so 1 in 5 who feel that it's going to cause a collapse in civilization. But some other things are happening there. Just across the top, you can see that there's, you know, a range of different positive and negative sentiments. And again, the picture's sort of very, very kind of confused, I think, from a consumer perspective. And so, you know, if brands want to hold on to that level of trust or that sense of in society, they can, you know, provide a little bit more of an even hand when there's so much macro flux in progress. Thinking through how a brand should use AI, I think, becomes incredibly important. So just looking at customers and brands and the interrelationship, quite a lot going on this chart. But if we just take the 3 themes, when they have a bad brand experience, what do they do? Fair exchange becoming something that's increasingly important for a lot of people. And then what happens when they're dealing with or buying brands online? I think let's ignore the one on the left-hand side, even though it's got the biggest circle at the moment, because that just, you know, indicates different ways in which people can respond to a bad brand experience. But from a fair exchange perspective, we're seeing a lot of this in our research where customers are increasingly looking for something in return for their business. You know, they like to have the upper hand with brands or feel that they're getting something extra in response for any information they might be providing, or that they're, you know, increasingly kind of understanding that they've got to share some of their data if they want to get better targeted products. But I guess also what has happened in terms of expectations, well, dealing with brands online for 28% has raised their expectations and made them less tolerant of the poor service that they might receive. Again, we've not tried to create incredibly large figures here through manipulating the scales. This is just trying to look at the extremes so that, again, we can look across the different groups and get a sense as to how does that play out. So if we just look at when they have a bad brand experience and buying and dealing with brands, first of all, you can see that the power masters in blue and the digital masters in orange there are often very similar in terms of where they're at across those types of statements. And we're starting to see the mobile masters actually looking a lot more like the digital doubters. So just because they're on their mobile doesn't mean to say that they have any more of these kind of extreme views that might kick in just because of the greater use of digital or being encouraged and or sometimes forced to do things more online. If we look at the fair exchange as well, it's those kinds of I want things in return. So almost the digital masters are the digitally equipped power masters to a large degree, and the mobile masters are very similar to the digital doubters. They just happen to be using their mobile a lot more. So again, just because the mobile's in the hand, it doesn't mean to say that they're a soft target in terms of the way that the brands might want to interact with them. And actually, you know, 3% there on the right-hand side of mobile masters saying that they're comfortable with brands they follow on social media, having access to their personal profile and data. They probably don't necessarily know how much is going on in the background, but that then becomes really important when a brand thinks about how it should be utilizing that data and it should be engaging with its customer base, you know, particularly if they have a lot of mobile masters in that base. Removing pain points has always been something that's incredibly important. Again, where does sort of digital, you know, sit alongside that? You know, you're seeing that a large proportion feel that they should get the same quality of service regardless of the different channels they might use, whether it's digital or physical or, you know, everything in between. They are looking for brands to simplify and make things easy. They will use brands again and again if the app or the mobile site is easy to use and it engages them. You know, judging brands on how they put things right if things go wrong are still something that's incredibly important to people. Perhaps less so as we start to get into these sort of preferences around, you know, you've got different cohorts in different groups here in terms of whether they want to speak to a person or whether they are willing to deal with brands online or via an app. And this was had quite a lot of attitude statements that we could look at here. I think what's also interesting to look on the right-hand side, the bottom 2 boxes there, 30% saying that actually they don't expect brands to actively try to engage them on social media. That isn't something that they're looking for. And again, just thinking through the different ways in which we might reach customers, it's really helpful to understand what type of customer base do we have so that we can think through these strategies in the most effective way. And I know that sounds marketing 101, but there is just such a groundswell of just thinking that all customers now are very digitally equipped. And, you know, if we just looked at the mobile masters and the digital masters together, they are some 7 in 10 of customers now or so. They're not all the same, and that becomes increasingly important. Some of the shifts we can see that digital's had between 2019 and 2024. You can see that there's been a significant increase there in terms of, you know, if the mobile site or the app is easy to use and engaging, they'll use it again and again. So really plowing a lot of effort into that. I apologize if British Airways are watching this, but you know, trying to get through on the flight on Saturday that I was on with my family, and just the British Airways app just never working, constantly crashing, not opening, asking you to log in again and again. It's just something that means that you do think, do I really want to go through this experience with this airline? So, you know, they've got a lot of work to do, I think, to improve their smartphone app, unfortunately. But you can see, again, there have been some other increases there across the piece. Where we have seen some decrease, and I think this is in line with what we saw around the pandemic, is, you know, during the pandemic period, we saw that brands were more tolerant of brands, you know, sometimes not getting things right. There was a lot that brands were having to deal with, whether it's customer service, et cetera, et cetera. We have seen that that has decreased since pre-pandemic periods. So maybe that pandemic period having a bit of an impact on the way that people are looking at brands getting things right the first time. You know, there's also a reluctance, if you like, or a belief that if you want to share data these days, or, you know, the fact that you have to share data is becoming unavoidable. A little bit of an increase in that sense of I'm happy to share if I get a better experience or if it makes my life easier, etc. But what we've not seen any change in whatsoever is the level of concern about how brands store and use their personal information. There's probably greater understanding since 2019 about how this works, but the brands have not yet shifted the dial on how customers feel about that. And actually, if we look at that across the different 4 cohorts, just on the right-hand side there, you can see that the differences that are typical between the Power Masters and Digital Masters, and then the Mobile Masters and Digital Doubters. But when it comes to concern about how brands are storing and using personal information, that's actually similar across all 4 cohorts. And I guess, you know, personalization has always been something that's been talked about, and digital, you know, etc., was, you know, going to help brands with greater personalization. Well, not everyone wants it. And again, it's really interesting to see that the Mobile Masters, even though obviously the mobile phone can do masses of personalization for them, it's not necessarily something that they are calling out for. So just looking a little bit at loyalty, and then I'll hand back to Ali. So are the sort of relationships at risk? What we can see is there's quite a lot of interest in deals and rewards. That's always been the case, but obviously people can get their hands on comparing prices and saving money and bargains and loyalty schemes much more easily now with digital and the way that those work for people. So, you know, things like personalization, which we've just kind of knocked a little bit on the head, probably does play a really strong role in people being able to access some of the deals and rewards that they're looking for. We've still got, though, despite all the turmoil and despite all the flux out there, 2 in 5 saying that once they find a brand they trust, they like to stick with it. And that's not just about having an easier life. I think that's also just about thinking through, well, what works for me? What do I feel is going to make my life easier, but at the same time, be the brand that reflects me, my image, etc., etc. And again, we can look at these in terms of deals and rewards, a little bit more universal across the piece, but obviously the digital doubters still being behind there. The Mobile Masters creeping up a little bit in some places, so they do get satisfaction from saving money, but less inclined perhaps to use loyalty schemes than the Digital Masters and the Power Masters. They're sucker for a bargain, etc., etc. And brand and ease, actually, you know, even though the Digital Masters have got lots of different tools at their disposal, once they find a brand, actually, they're the most likely to say that they will stick with that brand once they find a brand that they trust. So, Ali, I'm just very conscious of time, so I bulleted through quite a lot of that. But if you want, I will press buttons for you if you want to talk about what you feel it means for brands.
Yes, let's just go very quickly through that. Thank you, Ben. You're going to go to the next one?
Has it not?
No.
Try again. How's that?
Right, thank you. We've rattled through a lot of data, obviously, and there's a ton more in there that we haven't shared with you today, including some very, very interesting insight financially. But what this research does is highlights some of the tensions, some of the subtleties in the differences between different types of digital preference that will allow clients to build their, what we're calling your customer emotional intelligence rather than artificial intelligence. And really that's about having a better empathy with the different customer mindsets that exist out there, and you think in a more nuanced way about your customer strategy to design a proposition experiences, because as I said right at the outset, it is very clear from this that one size does not fit all, and that even amongst our digital masters, there is still very much, in certain circumstances, a leaning towards real life experiences. Click on. And we just sort of wanted to pull out 5 trends here that we think are worth thinking about and worth kind of reflecting on. The first is around, whether the emergence of a kind of a digital customer class system, where actually strategies are directed more and more towards the digital master cohort, and at risk of leaving, in particular, the mobile masters and the digital doubters behind. When you think about the mobile master, is the risk of drinking the Kool-Aid, I guess, around people's desire to engage digitally for everything, and the evidence that suggests that when the rubber really hits the road, customers of all types like to be able to have human contact. The human engagement in the customer relationship is still absolutely crucial. The third thing is that actually this harder, and it is not easy to create brand opportunities from mobile dependency. We've seen we're all mobile addicts, but actually people's willingness to move beyond the social media and email apps and gaming apps into m-commerce is still a challenge that is yet to be fought and won, I think. And, it is clearly not, it's not an easy mountain to climb. And linking into that is this kind of pushback in some respects about attitudes towards technology, even amongst the most digitally engaged, and just recognizing that, of course, there are generational differences, but even within the younger generations, there's still a healthy degree of skepticism and a need to convince of the benefits of technology, and not least of which related to impact on people's health. And we started off with saying that, we are in our internet ubiquity era. We started with the Taylor Swift reference. We should end with one. We're also in the era of uncertainty. And, we've talked and we've seen how brands still hold the trust, a key to building trust. And we're going to come back to that in a minute when we talk with the panel. But trust is still vital, particularly living through waves of uncertainty. We're constantly in fight or flight mode. And what are customers going to be looking to? Who are customers going to be looking to provide that still point in a turning world? So those are the trends that we see affecting the digital engagement. I think it's time to hear from other voices in the room. We feel a little bit like Charlie's Angels here, but there's nothing wrong with that. So let me turn to introduce our 2 panelists, or for themselves actually. Let me start with Simon Brady. Do tell us about yourself, and maybe just 1 or 2 reflections on what you've heard.
Well, first of all, I'm a power master, and I guess I fit the demographic of the man. In terms of my background, I've worked in FMCG and retail leading brands for most of my life, so I'm quite customer centric. Now in aviation, it's kind of really interesting when you look at the digital space, especially as an airport. We don't have a direct relationship with our customer, so it presents unique challenges in terms of how we interact with data and a digital proposition point of view.
And yet the passengers, I would posit, probably feel very much customers of yours.
They do, yes. Therein lies the challenge, because they have expectations of us as an airport, and we don't have necessarily the direct relationship with them. It's held by the airlines. So we still have to deliver for them from an experience point of view. So that presents its unique challenges.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Lindsay, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Forster. I'm the CEO of Shepper. As Ali has alluded to, I largely have a financial services background, so have worked across retail banking, commercial banking and insurance. Fascinating study. By the way, if it looks like we're very close, we're actually even closer.
We are.
In reality. It's very hot as well, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Anyway, so a couple of things. I mean, really interesting study. A couple of things, I guess, that I would pull out. I mean, obviously the omni-channel trends And certainly within our business, we've gone from almost exclusively looking at in-person experiences to more and more looking at omni-channel.
Tell us very briefly what
experiences.
Shepper is, because chances are people won't have come across you.
So Shepper is an insights platform. It's a tech business which marries technology with a large community of local peoples. We have about 10,000 people in the UK and Ireland, and we effectively work on behalf of brands, largely in the retail and on-trade space, to collect product data, pricing data, promotional data, but increasingly experiential. So, you know, now brands are much more interested in understanding what you press the play button, what happens with the delivery experience, the click and collect experience, the food delivery experience, and understanding that kind of end-to-end journey. So, you know, typically.
So you must be a digital master, right, Lindsay?
I don't know whether I'm a mobile master. I'm actually one of those people that if it's inappropriate to take your phone into a toilet, I just look at my watch. I mean, I absolutely, it's the first thing. I'm running a technology business. I am kind of always on. And I spend a lot of time experiencing different people's or different brands' experiences, given what we do. So I think the omni-channel trends in here, you know, particularly around digital experiences, raising the bar. And actually, if you have a super quick, slick, efficient process online, you expect that to be replicated when you go into a store and collect something. So I think that whole thing is really, really interesting. And I think to your point, Ali, kind of brought to life that when something goes wrong, you know, 48% of people judge brands on how they put it right. And as you quite rightly said, putting things right when they go really wrong is almost impossible digitally, because it's all about people and empathy.
Yeah, there's a tipping point, isn't there? Seamlessness is really difficult to deliver, but I think increasingly the aim of the game, if not the name of the game.
It is, and of course it's much more building digital experience for customers is much more controlled. You know, there's much more research, testing, technology that enables you to understand end-to-end how consumers are experiencing the journey that's been created. As we know in real world, when you leave digital and you go into the physical world, it's much more difficult to control.
Yeah, okay. We'll probably come back to that. I just wanted to say to people, these two experts that I have with me here are willing to take your questions, so please do pop them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen if you want to. And if we have time, because we've got quite a lot to cover, we'll go to that. I want to come back to the change that Gatwick have been, or should I say London Gatwick? I can't, you know, I'm a customer, so
London
I get
Gatwick.
what I want.
London Gatwick.
The brand has been going through nothing short of a transformational brand. In the past year, you have effectively relaunched the brand. You've got identity, you have a new purpose and vision and mission and all of that.
Yeah.
And you've done a lot of work on understanding your customers. So within all of that, given the fact that, you know, Gatwick is like a mini city, it has that challenge of being all things to all men, but at the same time trying to deliver an experience that meets the needs of the different segments that you know you have within your base. So how have you been navigating that? And where do you see digital fitting within all of that?
Well, it's interesting when we start to look at it. It's not unsurprising that we have to appeal to all types of customers, irrespective of where they are in terms of their digital adoption. So it's quite interesting in the data we've seen around. There's still a sizable cohort of customers, particularly boomers, that are digital doubters, and I think as an airport we need to never forget that. When we did all our repositioning work with you, and based on quite a lot of customer insight, we found that everybody has very unique expectation in the airport. There is no one size fits all for us. So we have a challenge that we have to deliver a tailored, personalized experience to people that's very varied. And we're very much a physical environment. So for us to do that, we really do need customers to share a lot of their data with us to allow us to develop digital propositions that can tailor that experience to them. As I said before, given we don't have that direct relationship with customers, we have a maximum relationship with 15% of our customers, that presents a unique challenge to us. So it's interesting if you look at the insights we saw more willing to share data with businesses. And we do see that, and we did see that in our research. But the key thing is you need to have that value exchange that's actually meaningful to them. And for us, as with many brands, that goes way beyond earning and burning points or promotional offers. So for us, it's actually providing real emotional benefits around reducing stress, reducing anxiety, and freeing time, and the very higher order benefits for customers. But that's what we need to deliver to customers, to get them to share their data with us, because ideally they should be sharing their biometrics with us, which is even another level of data.
So you're almost like inverting the pyramid. You're focusing on the peace of mind, the self-actualization piece before you get to the kind of nitty-gritty of the transaction. Of the transaction.
Yeah, exactly. You have to operate right at the emotional end of the spectrum in terms of the customer experience improvements you deliver to people in order to get them to want to share their biometrics with you as a business.
Put them in the space where they want to spend lots of money in duty free and in
exactly.
Food and beverage outlets.
Exactly.
Yeah, I buy that. Okay, and we'll come back to that. Lindsay, you've already mentioned omni-channel, and your business works a lot in that retail space, increasingly, as you said, on the experiential side of things, as well as making sure that there are promotionally or product wise things are in the right space. But based on your experience of working with retail clients, what are the takeouts for you from this work for retailer brands?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to kind of go back to the conversation that we were having, I mean, I think if I kind of go back to the financial services days, which is very different from retail on the basis that most financial services products can be measured and ROI can be calculated over a much longer period of time, right? But I mean, if you look back into the digital principles of build once and build for many, it's much easier to wow customers, and the business case is much more compelling when you're building research journeys, purchase journeys, because you're building those for 100% of customers. Actually building experiences for people who are unhappy with products, people that want to service their products online, that's never going to get and hasn't got the same focus. So, and of course, when you start the omni-channel, it becomes far more predictable, less easy to measure, and actually more so through efficiency. People are outsourcing some of that to couriers. I mean, interestingly, I had the most fantastic experience on Deliveroo. Ordered lunch for my whole team, and it was delivered by boss. Yeah, I am. It's delivered by an Uber driver, fully Ubered up. I'm all for Team Uber, but
that's a bit of a
I'd be very upset.
Cognitive dissonance might be a bit, yes.
And I think brands, and I think retailers and consumer brands need to get much better at understanding the end-to-end journey and finding innovative ways to start to measure and drive insights on what happens the moment you leave the digital world. I mean, I had an interesting experience of ordering something through a very large online retailer, which was delivered to me just before Christmas. It was an important Christmas present. And I basically got a picture of a man from the waist downwards. And I didn't know where the product was. And I actually sent the man's lower half to the whole street to say, does anybody know who this is? Someone helpfully said, it's Eddie at number 88. And I managed to retrieve it. But, that's the wow of the...
Eddie was clothed, right?
Eddie was clothed.
Thank God.
Yeah. Thank goodness. But actually, I think it's about measuring lifetime value, and I think it's about looking at the end-to-end experience. And I think something that you touched on was interesting. I mean, largely the projects that we tend to run in the retail world, they tend to be either focused around efficiency and effectiveness, so people that want to do things quickly, slick, and actually it's all about time and making things easy and transparent. And then you've got the other part of retail, which is all about the experience and more considered purchase, which I don't think are clearly delineated in terms of brand journeys.
Totally agree.
So, I think there's a lot more work to do, but I'm really encouraged that we're doing more and more work through omni-channel. And actually, we're just about to kick off a piece of work for a beauty brand who really wants to get under the skin of when things go wrong. So let's look at all of the competitor landscape. We want to understand what is the journey, for trying to get help with a product and to return a product.
I mean, isn't that the danger? Sort of like in a digital space, it's very easy to focus on user experience and forget there's an omni-channel physical experience that most situations is tacked onto that and integrated with that. And we can forget about that really easily.
Which is often the wow moment
That
of
we
the
build
whole
on.
experience.
Usually, and also the key thing around when something goes wrong in the digital space, most customers, and we found that through our research, they revert to wanting a human to fix it for them.
Yeah.
So you really need to think about the whole omni-channel, about how you really look at physical customer experience and the digital user experience and integrate the two together.
I remember when I was a baby researcher, which was a long, long time ago, I read a book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which, you know, was a thing for a while, and I thought I was, you know, incredibly hip for reading this book. But there's a phrase in that book that has always stuck with me throughout my entire career, and I think it applies precisely to what you're talking about here, which is that quality is not a thing, it is an event. And, you know, the idea that you feel it rather than touch it, I think is what you're talking about, you know, the emotional engagement piece. And I want to move on to loyalty, Simon. And, you know, you're in a very fiercely, perhaps one of the fiercest marketplaces, and particularly when you're looking at the London airport market, for example, people have a lot of choice. So, you know, and as we've seen through the data, people will exercise their choice because they're looking for a deal, because they're not feeling duty bound to return to the same people that they bought. So what you sort of boil it down, you've got kind of two schools of thought. You've got the stick or the twist school of thought. We know that in a category like insurance, you know, we have all been educated to twist. In other categories, less so. There's more willingness to be loyal. But what digitals do you think what opportunities do you think digital creates for creating that loyalty for a brand like Gatwick, which is one step removed a little bit from the customer?
I think it's interesting because we have a very low frequency of interaction with our customers. So most customers will come through an airport or travel maybe twice a year. So really you have to delight them when you have them in that physical environment. And it's all heightened in an airport because you have the opportunity to make or break someone's holiday, right? So for us,
no pressure.
No pressure. So we really have
not
to.
Not like buying a pair of smalls, is it?
Yeah, no. And actually, it's interesting because I've been in aviation, an airline, and in an airport, and I know from working at Virgin that your NPS can be set up for success or completely broken by your experience in the airport. So for us, it's about taking that one opportunity or two opportunities a year we have with customers to own that relationship and to delight them from the experience. And therefore, all other things being equal, next time they'll choose to fly through our airport.
Right, so very much focus on that. It is the pressure's high though. If you're like all of those millions of people that are coming through your doors, and you are aiming to deliver a great experience every single time.
Yeah.
How are you using digital to enable that?
Well, I mean, first and foremost for us, it's about getting customers to share more of their data with us directly.
Right. So
we can only tailor and personalize their experience for them by them wanting to share. So that can be at a basic level in terms of, you know, I've got a family, therefore I need to know where the baby change facilities are in the airport when I'm using digital wayfinding. Or at the extreme, it can be wanting to share biometrics with us in terms of it could speed them through all of the pain points through the airport. But that's very higher order data to ask customers to share with you.
Ultimate trust, right?
Ultimate trust and want to share your biometrics. So therefore, what you deliver them has to be, you know, truly an elevated customer experience that actually you're prepared to put high sort of hard yards in terms of delivering for them. So it can't be the kind of like transactional kind of promotional value level. It needs to be far more emotive in terms of that benefit.
So it's so interesting because there are so many facets of going on holiday that are potentially not in your control.
That's right.
Like the traffic on the M25.
That's right.
Like the hotel that you book that you think is in Gatwick but isn't.
Yeah.
Which wasn't done through you.
That's right.
All of those things, and understanding the nature of the trip, what's important.
Yeah.
For me, it was about efficiency. I had
Yeah.
a 6 a.m. flight, right? And it's so difficult to just isolate the proportionality of what's important for customers and where you draw the line in terms of what you try and control and manage as around the customer experience.
But that's why it's super important to approach this at an ecosystem level. Because we could approach it as an airport, and we can do what Heathrow's done, which is develop a Heathrow rewards app. And we try to control a little proportion of the customer journey. We need to recognise that there are multiple businesses involved in that whole experience. So the key is actually to integrate our thinking at an ecosystem level in terms of sharing data, developing digital propositions. So for example, if I want to speed through an airport, I don't want to have an airport app and an EasyJet app. I want to have an ecosystem solution that communicates with itself and is integrated. So I don't have to actually deal with different businesses to streamline that process. And there, because businesses don't generally want to share either data or benefits between, particularly when you could see we're actually competing for the customer relationship.
Yeah, but there's a codependency there. I mean, the same is true of department.
That's why you've got to think in a very integrated ecosystem level. Otherwise, you won't deliver those benefits for the customers. So, for example, even if we did it with Gatwick and EasyJet, but then you landed at another airport at the other end and it wasn't integrated, therein is another customer experience problem. Yes, you've got to think through the whole customer journey, and we've even got to think about our competitors down route in other markets and how they integrate with the same solution that we do.
I want to talk, because what we're kind of talking about there is effort, right? And certainly effort has been something that we've done, we spend a lot of time thinking about, and we include in a lot of our customer experience work and our tracking work in particular. But one of the themes that came out of the research this year was loyalty, with trust, and the importance of trust. Apparently the UK is one of the least trusting nations in the world, according to the Edelman Trust Barometer, which has been running for 24 years. And yet brands, are still in the position where brands are more trusted than governments and other some brands, yes, you're right. Not all brands are equal. Some brands are more trusted than government institutions and other public institutions, which I think is really interesting, because it feels to me like trust was something that we were all talking about, 5 or 6 years ago, but not so much now. And yet it's come out as being really important. So is there, what are the lessons on trust that you take from this?
I think the key one for me is being more long-term about the benefits you want to deliver the customer. So for example, if you're asking them to share data with you, or you're developing digital propositions with a short-term focus, a short-term financial transaction, as an example, or short-term marketing campaign, then that's going to clearly quite quickly betray that trust that customer with you. So you've got to be in it for the long haul. You've got to be in it to create those step changes in customer experience through long-term investment that's going to be a real benefit for the customer. So in our world, it's about improvements in things like time, stress, and anxiety. And those are long-term investments. And if you've got a short-term payback mentality as a business, you're never going to get to those long-term benefits for the customer. So you've really got to put that long-term customer thinking into the frame, I think, when you're talking about data sharing and digital propositions.
What's your thoughts on building brand trust?
Look, I think your relationship with the brand is not hugely different from a relationship with an individual, right? And trust is earned, is gained over the long term. So I think I completely agree with Simon. I think there are new hygiene factors that customers expect that brands to achieve just to get on the chart of consideration and therefore loyalty and trust. I think a couple of things for me. Transparency is absolutely key. I think this kind of fair value exchange or reciprocal reward. And, if you've got something to say it. I think people value honesty and transparency. And I think trying to edge customers or to try and, chip up prices, whatever you're trying to do. Customers are pretty savvy, right? So I think transparency for me is absolutely key. And certainly if you're asking customers to share data, which is personal and sensitive to them. They want to know, A, you're going to look after it, and B, that you're going to use it to mutual benefit. And I think the other thing is, I mean, you know, digital is a personalization machine, and you can do brilliant things with that, but you could also create some damage pretty quickly. So I think there is a real opportunity over the long term. There's already some fantastic models around, you know, predictive ordering, you know, and of course the likes of Amazon, who have huge budgets and huge numbers of transactions, are, I think, leading the way in some of this. They're not always getting it right, but I think they're making some fantastic strides in this area. So I think personalization is really important. And I think one of the things I was going to mention about AI, because of course it's not just about the data that you have and how you process and structure it, it's about how you use it in a customer-centric way. And I think AI, needs to be used thoughtfully and carefully. And I think what's interesting, kind of going back to my retail banking days, is of course all of the younger segments were behind the digital revolution. They were pushing it, they were forcing it. It's not the case with AI. There's a level of skepticism, there's a level of, you know, divide even between the digital masters and the mobile masters, which I think will make the journey not as speedy in terms of, and I don't think it is a one size fits all.
A few more roadblocks. We have run out of time. I think what that kind of is a good place to finish on, because it just makes me look forward to the next time we run this tracker to see where and how we move as a nation. Thank you to my two panelists, Simon and Lindsay. Thank you, Ben, for telling such a great story of the data. And thank you to everybody for joining us. Until the next time, as we say.